Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Basu and Godin Notebook. I am Marc-Antoine Godin alongside Arpin Basu. What a surprise! The show is named Basu and Godin, and here we are still being Basu and Godin. Amazing. How are you, Arpin?
I'm good. Did a lot of driving this weekend.
The Thousand
Interesting drive.
Nice place, huh?
Thousand Islands is a nice place to drive through. Yes.
Yeah.
They closed the 401 randomly on me sometime before Cornwall. That wasn't fun. But anyhow, yeah, a lot of driving back and forth to Buffalo. Had an interesting day Saturday, talking to a lot of draft eligible kids, trying to get a sense of where the Canadiens' interest lies. And one thing I came away with from the whole process is the Canadiens are very thorough. There are a lot of kids who seem to think the Canadiens are very interested in them just based on the number of times they cross paths with the Canadiens. Doesn't mean the Canadiens are actually interested in all of them. But they definitely left an impression with several kids that they are on their radar, which I think is a sign of how thorough they are, and also a sign of how the cloak and dagger stuff is alive and well with the Canadiens. They do like to send out some smoke screens every now and then and try and muddy the waters of what their interest is. And this year, obviously, with them picking out of the top five for the first time under this administration, definitely much harder to pin down what they're looking at. But I think a few things kind of emerged over the weekend.
Oh yeah. So, is there one thing in particular when you say that really comes to mind? Because I mean, this annual gathering of prospects and all those scrums that we go from one to the other, and you always have those people say, did you talk to Columbus? Did you talk to Buffalo? So you've got all that stuff, and in between there are little nuggets to be had here and there, and you've got to be fully aware to catch them when they pass, but enough that all those nuggets, there was something that stood out for you. There's something that
I think
made sense.
Well, there's two things. First of all, I think that the Canadiens were speaking to a lot of kids that will not be there when they speak at 16, which speaks to their, and I shouldn't say just spoke to, but I mean followed closely. Radim Murtka being one of them, right? There's no world in which Radim Murtka will be available at 16, the big right shot D for the Seattle Thunderbirds, yeah. But when you hold the 16th and 17th picks and you have 41 and 49 in your back pocket, there's a possibility for the Canadiens to move up. So I think they did a lot of due diligence on kids that would be available in, say, that 7 to 12 range or something like that. There are teams willing to move picks in that range. There's Boston, who maybe could be tempted by some pick volume, even though if I were them, I would be looking for the highest impact kind of guy. But they haven't made a lot of picks in recent years. Their pipeline is quite barren. So maybe having 16 and 41 instead of and 49 even, or maybe even another third round pick, to move down 9 slots, which really takes them out of a pretty clearly defined tier that I think everyone really kind of agrees on, like that 8-9 range is when it starts to dip, right? So,
yeah.
So it's not likely, but possible. The Sabres pick is clearly on the market. I don't think the Canadiens have what the Sabres are looking for, but still, I could see the Ducks moving their pick at 10. I could see Detroit moving their pick at 13. But all these teams would want something the Canadiens aren't really offering, which is immediate help. It's actually what they're looking for. So, but still, so that was one takeaway, is that they did a lot of due diligence on guys that they're not likely to see. One of the more interesting ones was Keyshawn Aitchison, who, and I quote, "I can't remember," when asked how often Montreal came to talk to him during the season. I'm like, really? You can't remember? First of all, the Canadiens didn't talk to him at the Combine. And yeah, he gave kind of a very kind of sly sort of look on his face and just said, I can't remember. The only kid, I mean, it's not every day an NHL team comes to your building to talk to you. You would think that you would have at least some recollection of speaking to a specific a specific NHL team. So I can't remember was kind of like, oh, were you told to not remember, or is this coming
Right.
just from me? I guess I can't imagine you can't remember. So, but anyhow, this is, I think the Canadiens are ready for a lot of eventualities at the draft. Moving up, I guess, would be one of them. And the other takeaway, and this is not surprising by any stretch, but any big, somewhat lanky slash room to fill out kid that was there had some degree of interest from Montreal. There's definitely a type that they're looking at. I think Tyler Thorpe was in the fifth round, but like that profile higher up in the draft, I'm thinking of a guy like Will Moore. I spoke to Matthew Gard for a while, who's a projected second round pick, bit of a late bloomer, really interesting kid. Jack Nesbitt, who was, quite adamant the Canadiens are very interested in him and his answer was great. It's because I'm big. It's because I'm big. I can be physical. I'll fight anytime. And we'll see how that, and I have grit in my game. We'll see how that translates to the NHL was what he said. To the question of why do you think Montreal likes you? And I thought that was pretty on the nose because I think that's generally what Montreal is looking to fill out in this draft to some extent. Maybe they see it as something they're lacking to some extent in the prospect pool. I don't know to what extent that's true, but there's a type there that I think the Canadiens, not necessarily at 16 or 17, but later in the draft, they have, they do have 4 picks in the top 50 in this draft. Later in the draft, you might start seeing guys like that
Right.
going off the board. Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk about today some candidates in various situations for guys that they could be of interest for the Montreal Canadiens at 16 and 17. But just by talking about the physical aspect, I know that it's something that's been not only rumored, but it seems to be like common knowledge by now that the Canadiens feel like they still need to get bigger.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if way past the first round, later on there in the draft, there's this kid called Carter Klippenstein, who's a centerman for Brendan for the Wheat Kings, and he really did well during the testings, and he's a 6'3" centerman. He's not very productive offensively, so very low ceiling, but we'll see if just because of his physical nature and the fact that seems to be both strong and gifted athletically speaking, he could be of interest for them. But listen, without further ado, there's you mentioned Murtka. There's no chance in hell that he's going to be available for the Canadiens at 16 and 17. So let's dive into it. And diving into it in the sense that we're going to look at prospects that would be ideal case scenarios for the Canadiens, but who might need to slide for the Canadiens. Let's forget the scenarios of the Canadiens trading up because otherwise everybody becomes available. So
yes, exactly.
Right. So we're not going to get into that. It's the caveat of this conversation, but candidates that could potentially slide to 16 and 17. Those also who are at least in the publicly available discussion and lists, who are right on the target for the Canadiens to draft at 16, 17, and maybe some guys that are perhaps listed a bit later, but who should be in consideration because we know year after year what those lists that we see flying left, right, and center, sometimes they can be quite accurate, but you always have some guys that are drafted way earlier than expected. Last year, Jet Lutsenko, was drafted 13 overall by the Philadelphia Flyers, but it seemed that if you were reading the draft experts a little bit everywhere, he seemed more like an early 20s type of pick, so he was drafted earlier. There are cases like that every year, so it's worth paying attention because the Canadiens having 2 picks might choose to take one of those picks and say, you know, this kid might not have developed yet in a way that he has made himself extremely attractive, but we like the upside and he's worth taking a chance on with one of our two picks. Um,
Well, this is
yeah,
kind of this is kind of the beauty of, I had a piece that came out this morning on the Athletic, kind of looking at this, but I think that's the advantage of having two consecutive picks, right? Like you can make that decision. Let's take a chance on kid A, and then with the second pick, go with someone that's a little bit more safe, and so and more of a, let's say, a high floor player, or someone that you're more assured will have a long NHL career without necessarily having that star potential that you would use the other pick on, a high risk, high reward kind of kid. So I don't know if the Canadiens are necessarily going to do that. They might not philosophically agree with that notion, but it is a possibility that's available to them when you're picking in consecutive spots at 16 and 17, like right in the middle of the first round. Uh, it provide and you know, oftentimes when a kid starts to slide, the slide continues, right? Like it's we've seen a lot of cases where kids, the slide, you thought it would be 2 or 3 spots, it winds up being 7, 8, 9 spots. Obviously that won't be the case here at 16, but if someone were to slide, um, for example, someone like Carter Bear, who
yeah,
is coming off an Achilles injury, pretty rare injury for a player to have in his draft year. Were it not for that injury, there's no chance in hell Carter Bear would be available at 16. I don't think, with just the sort of the high compete playoff style player he is. A lot of really nice attributes for any NHL team to want, but that Achilles injury might scare some teams off, and so that's a risk that the Canadiens might be more willing to take uh, than some other teams. But should be noted that ahead of them at number 14 is Columbus, who has that same security in having the 20th pick. And so if they want to take a swing on a kid at 14, they know that they're going to get another first round talent 6 picks later. So it's not exclusive to the Canadiens, but the fact that it's consecutive picks allows them to take that risk, knowing that the guy they want as the sort of the safe pick is there. Um,
yeah.
Whereas Columbus doesn't have that assurance. Sometime between 14 and 20, you might lose the guy that you were hoping to take at 20, and then you're kind of you've taken a risk without having that assurance of the player you get at 20. Um, so yeah, I think, and there are other examples of players that could slide. Victor Eklund is another one, because he's small. He's a small winger, but super talented. You know, showed a lot of good traits. If he weren't 5'10" or 5'11", I forget what he measured in at, but I don't think he'll get to 16. But you never know. With smaller winger types, it's always possible, and so maybe that's something the Canadiens could look at, even though they seem quite adamant that they need to get bigger through this draft.